There's one thing I always meant to ask Jack. I wanted to know about that doctor of his. The man who appears out of nowhere and saves the world, except sometimes he doesn't. All those times in history when there was no sign of him. I wanted to know why not. But I don't need to ask anymore. I know the answer now. Sometimes the doctor must look at this planet and turn away in shame.
Most of you will likely know that I'm a massive Doctor Who fan, so of course I've seen the spin-offs, Sarah Jane, even Class, and of course Torchwood. As a whole, I like Torchwood, even though it's undoubtedly a mixed bag, except for its third season, which is where we're at today. Children of Earth is one of, if not potentially, my favourite story within the Doctor Who universe, definitely in terms of spin-offs. But I think without much doubt, this is probably the darkest and the most effective at being the darkest. Whereas Season 1 especially, but also Season 2, Torchwood was just trying to be Doctor Who for adults, but ended up coming off as edgy and more laughably bad. This one nails its maturity. It was a big mix-up for the series after the first two were pretty standard Monster of the Week style shows, with only few connections over the entire season, but come to Children of Earth, with T Davies having a bigger hand in this, as well as Euros Lyn directing every single episode, it was a total format change-up, and in my opinion, was a change that was necessary, and that worked, and despite Miracle Day being a mixed bag that followed up this series, I think it still stands in high regard amongst fans.
We are coming. We are coming.
Oh my god!
We are coming.
We meet all the main characters in pretty quick succession on day one and see how many of them have kids, which initially connects them to the title of the series. And we see the first occurrence. Every child on the planet just stops in place exactly where they're stood, non-reactive to anything in their surroundings, before moments later continuing on as if nothing has happened. An incident small enough that most people think it's just their kids pulling a prank. One random incident until word starts getting around, but people aren't taking too much notice, just kids being kids. Then we kind of led into a false sense of security for most of the episode, where Torchwood is just getting on with Torchwood's jobs. We meet this incredibly annoying character who thankfully doesn't really stick around, but again, this is what I mean, the false sense of security. We kind of think, oh god, this new guy's going to join the team, then we get that twist at the end, and it's a pretty good twist. And throughout this episode, everything with the children is being mentioned in the background, but it's not the main focus. John Frobisher is played by Peter Capaldi in this series. What an actor, honestly. But he's in Parliament and he's become aware of this event that's happened with the children, because it wasn't just isolated, this was global. This happened to every single child on planet Earth. Well, every single child on one man. The escalation is kind of crazy, but we keep it grounded by seeing the people who run the country deal with this situation, and as becomes a point in this series, a world without someone like the Doctor who's coming in to save everyone. Our characters also realise that not only is every child doing the same thing, every child is talking English. Torchwood realising this leads Jack to go and see his daughter, which isn't really a surprise despite no mention in the previous series. He's been around for a very long time, and I truly think it would be stranger if he hadn't made a family at one point or another. He even has a grandson, Stephen, who they're telling him that Jack is his uncle, because how do you explain to someone that your granddad is going to be standing over both of your graves without aging a day? Jack comes round asking to spend time with Stephen, but Alice sees straight through him. They've clearly got quite an estranged relationship, with Alice believing he's dangerous and him kind of proving her right. She knows that it's not a coincidence that on the one day something's going on with the children, Jack is making a visit. Back in Parliament, Decker makes Frobisher aware that this wavelength on the 456 has been opened. He's currently translating the information that they've been given, but this wavelength was opened once before, back in 1965, which it was the cold open to this episode, and so now we realise there is a connection. Whatever is happening now has some sort of relevance to what happened in 1965. Back in modern day, or 2009, with the Prime Minister's order to wipe any evidence of people who knew what happened in 1965 to cover their own backs, Jack Harkness is one of them. and taking Torchwood with him. Gwen has discovered that she's pregnant. Using a scan they have in the base, celebration quickly turns to terror as Jack, placing his hand on Gwen's, the scanner scans Jack and reveals he's got a bomb placed in his stomach. We'd seen Jack be killed and having a bomb placed inside him before he comes back to life, as they knew he does so and they wanted to ensure his death along with the destruction of Torchwood, as the government have hired this specialist team to take out all of those involved in that original night. Panic ensues in the Torchwood hub as they realise what's happening. The stakes skyrocket as now the children are all talking in unison again, and Capaldi is just too good for us.
We are coming. Stop it! Stop we are coming. Stop it! We are coming. Stop it!
Then ending on the bombshell.
Lockdown. We are coming.
Oh my god, this episode is such a great opener. Everything we knew how Torchwood operated has been brought to the ground on the brink of something massive in scale.
Who do you work for?
The NHS?
Who do you work for?
Throwing Torchwood under the bus straight off the bat and on the back foot makes such an interesting setup for how our protagonists will come through and deal with this situation. And the show utilises our expectation for how the team operates throughout the story, and it's great writing. Knowing that they're all targets, they get on the run, trying to stay as low as possible unnoticed, while simultaneously trying to figure out who's after them and what's truly at play. The government, being the ones who destroyed Cardiff Bay and who are causing all this mess, are also the ones labelling Torchwood as terrorists. The people doing the government's work are just supposed to not question it, and they don't, because that's how they've been raised, that's what they've been told. That's all they know. But this show is showcasing the point that it's not that black and white, and this threat in this series is revealing that. Gwen and Rhys are such a believable couple. Despite their mixed writing throughout season 1 especially, she's at a point now where she's so well realised along with their relationship. Even in the direst of situations, they bicker and shout like a married couple, but with that earnest fear for each other.
These khakis!
To the top of the fridge, I think.
I've tried on top of the bloody fridge, man! Come on, come on! You left the keys in the suitcase all the time. We wouldn't have to go through this time and time again.
Day 2 has Jack out of action for the entire time, since that bomb didn't actually kill him. The shot of the wriggling body bag is great, and this episode pushes Jack's immortality to the limit, but also leaves Gwen and Yanto feeling much more vulnerable, and the paranoia for our characters begins to set in. Whilst they're on the run, Gwen and Rhys meet Lois Habiba, who I think was actually meant to be Martha Jones, but since Freema Agyeman was unable to commit to the role due to scheduling conflicts, we now have this new character. And she's new. She started on day 1.
Picked a hell of a day.
And one of her first things that she saw was Frobisher give an order to kill, and then for them to cover up the murder. So Lois reveals that it was Frobisher who gave the order to have Jack killed along with Torchwood, which leaves the question as to why aren't they on the same side here, with this situation being Torchwood's speciality. As an audience, since Jack became immortal all the way back in Doctor Who Season 1, it's impossible not to question what would happen if an explosive was placed inside him, or if he was contained in concrete. It puts him through extremes, asking if he can be killed, and we have our answer: no. The way he reforms is really gnarly, and seems so painful. The screams of agony as we literally see his body rebuild from scratch.
He'd have been better off staying dead.
This episode ends with Gwen, Rhys and Yanto rescuing Jack, and we have this really fun sequence breaking him out of this concrete cell. Even if it does feel a little rushed, the character interactions are all really fun, but just where the fuck did Yanto get this thing? And also, I feel like when they dropped the block of concrete, would it not have ripped Jack to shreds? I don't know. Is that how it would have worked? I'm not sure. But Decker was able to translate the transmission through the 456, which turns out to be a level of detailed instructions for something for them to build. This alien has given these instructions, and the government are now just building something, and they don't even know what they're building.
I'm back.
The Prime Minister is such a slimy bastard in this series, which is what I mean. It's so well realised. He's doing everything he can to just keep his own back clean, and it's just infuriating. John Frobisher, on the other hand, is a really tragic character in a way, unable to really stand up for himself and just getting chosen as the fall guy for the government because he's dedicated his life to his work and his belief in it, but he just gets thrown on the front line. The political aspects of this series are really some of the best sequences because it does such a great job at bringing to life how planet Earth would cope with an extraterrestrial threat like this. If there was any way to hold the human race hostage, communicating through the next generation of people is the way to do it. But it also makes me intrigued when we've now been through COVID. If the government were offered an antidote for a gift in a scenario like this, I could see them doing it, which is a scary thought. This episode focuses on the rebuilding of Torchwood and them really trying to form a plan, using this makeshift base, which does make the destruction of the original base feel a little inconsequential, but it still has the feel of they've not got as much to work with, they're kind of scraping by, so I don't mind it. What I don't love about this episode though is when they go out to steal supplies, like money and clothes. It's a weird sequence because Gwen says that they're being treated like criminals, so why not just be criminals? And since Gwen was a police officer, she knows how to get away with it, but like they steal cars and stuff and they don't do it that discreetly, and these characters being so wanted, it's hard to believe that they'd get away with it, and also we never see them have any remorse for it. But anyway, with this, they somewhat get Torchwood back on track, hatching a plan where they enlist the help of Lois. She really becomes a character I'm invested in and just is generally more interesting to me in this episode, where she's having to use her wits and her will to join Frobisher in seeing this alien. It's impossible to talk about this show as well without talking about Ianto and Jack's relationship.
Do you want to take the car and go to those shops down by the wharf? We need some discs for these things. Should take about 20 minutes.
30 minutes.
30.
I'll go later. The beans are almost done.
The beans are almost done.
Bloody beans.
Which I think is written really well. Their conversation about how Jack will eventually be stood at Ianto's grave is a sad reality, something we also touched on with Jack having his family. They're both so clearly in love and want to grow old and spend their lives together, but that's not possible, and we feel the torture of being immortal as well as being with one. They decide to bring in Jack's daughter and grandson to get one up over Jack following Torchwood's escape. Seeing Alice's instincts knowing that someone is watching is one of the key moments that gives insight to what it's like having Harkness as a father. We never get too much concrete exposition about it, but we have moments like these that we can assume she learned these tactics from having him as a father, and it does make it completely clear why she doesn't want Jack that close in their lives. All the children start pointing. No one knows what they're pointing at, but after some time, they realise they're pointing towards the UK, and everyone in the UK is pointing towards London. Everyone in London is pointing towards Thames House. Every child on the planet, and Clem, are pointing towards Thames House.
Spare me your fucking psycho fanny, right?
The alien arrives in true spectacle, this bright beacon coming through into this tank that is supposed to hold the species that is just fueled with poison. The music smashing through and then it ending with all the children saying "we are here" is great. The voice of the 456 is haunting. It's just so powerful and massive feeling.
Speak.
And then the fact that one of the first calls of action Frobisher makes is to ask the 456 not to reveal what happened in 1965. Despite the fact that the entire world is at threat, the government's first one is to cover their own backs. The story unravels that what's happening now is a result of what happened in 1965, as Jack theorized and Frobisher is now confirmed, hence why he tried to have him killed, as well as all the others involved, so no one could reveal the truth. This phone call finally sets Frobisher and Harkness on equal ground in the series, having both their families at hostage against each other. These two characters are great in this series, both performances are brilliant, and it's a really strong question whether you could call either of these people good men after this series. This massive container that we can't really see into creates such an intimidating visual, mixed with the speakers and the soundtrack and its unpredictable nature to smash its head against the glass, splashing some kind of green liquid. A really fascinating creature that we only barely see and that we'd learn virtually nothing about, and that's what makes it so scary. Horror Rule 101. Whatever we can imagine is infinitely more scary than whatever is slapped on screen in front of us. This series gives just enough to create our own picture, but also so little that we have to come up with horrific imagery to fill in the gaps. We don't even get a name. We call them the 456 because that's the wavelength that they've communicated through. But we don't know their real name, we don't know where they're from. The reaction after first contact is just so realistic. I can't reiterate how good Capaldi is in this series. As said by the Prime Minister, Frobisher has been pushed into the front line. Whilst he believes it's an honour to be trusted with such a thing, everything he does is in dedication to the Prime Minister. Despite making decisions that are undoubtedly wrong, his man has been put on the front line in the middle of a global threat where the entire planet could be wiped out. The build up to what the 456 want is horrifying. The long pauses between dialogue are so incredibly tense, going from asking to a gift to then saying they want their children, to then saying they will take them, turning into a threat. And then thinking about the flashback at the opening of the series, you think maybe they're just going to ask for a handful.
We want 10%. We want 10% of the children of this world.
It's a devastating revelation. Jack finally returns to Torchwood, and as we'd kind of figured out, they handed a group of kids over back in 1965. But what we didn't know was that Jack is the one that handed them over. This is a really great twist, and where it's again blurring the lines of the nature of this character, especially in comparison to Frobisher and the government who are now having to consider such an act.
We're adapting right now, and we're making this a war.
And the fight begins.
Witnessing the actual events of 1965 is truly haunting thanks to the music and due to the uncertainty of the 456 and what's happening to these children, and also the fact that our main protagonist is putting on this uncanny lightheartedness to persuade the children to walk into the light. We also get more context to the situation though in how the 456 have offered them a cure to this disease that could wipe out a large portion of the population, which they did. A trade for the 12 children, and up until this point, the deal seemed to have worked. My problem with this flashback is how Frobisher gives the order to have everyone who was involved with the dealings killed. So does that include everyone here, or was it just a list of names we saw on day one? In fairness, I suppose these people could have died naturally, but it's just a little hole I noticed this time around. But this is also how we learn Clem's connection. Jack tried to hand Clem off, but he was kind of left behind as a remnant. And so he's had to go through all his life living on the streets and just struggling through, since as a kid, he was tried to deliver off to this creature that they didn't know what they were going to do with them, and all because
you wouldn't be missed.
And the fact that Jack is the one who was handing them over, someone who can't die, is so ironic and hypocritical. The 456 invite them into their structure, and what ensues is a straight up found footage horror sequence. This is the closest look we get at the 456. Despite being near face to face, they're still shrouded in mystery and are just as terrifying. We have no real idea of what this thing is capable of. The camera operator gets closer and we end up face to face with a child, totally deformed and also the same age. This is a child that was given to them in 1965, and they're still a child and look horrific. A horrible sight that, whilst the 456 claim they feel no pain, we don't know that that's true, and even if it is, when we find out what they're used for, it's a fate that's worse than death. This of course raises the question to other officials that are watching, other world leaders that have come in after noticing somehow this whole thing is connected to Britain and the fact that it's arrived in Britain. This obviously raises that question, where did they get this child? The 456 decide to reveal the truth and expose how it and the British government have had previous dealings.
Between Earth and the 456, 456, 456, 456, then previous encounter was give off the record, off the record, off the record.
It's John Frobisher's voice. What's off the record?
You got on the record and off the record fucking mixed up.
Following this, the world leaders are trying to figure out how to deal with this threat that they've presented. They propose an offer of giving the 456 6,700 children to have a smaller number that they can handle, which is still a fucking insane amount of children. but that is swiftly denied by the creature. So then they start discussing how to get away with shipping off 10% of the planet's children. This is a showcase of the worst of humanity, and the fact that these are coming from world leaders, people in power, people that we are supposed to trust and who are supposed to protect our planet, are here discussing how to just hand off our children to aliens. Insanity! Each of them attempt to justify their decision making with calling the children units and giving reason behind the madness, saying how it could help the risk of overpopulation. But each line sounds just as psychotic as the last one, and how such a large portion of this discussion is dedicated to how it looks on their part, how to cover their own backs, as opposed to how to figure out a way to fight, how to figure out a way to protect the children, is absurd, but so believable. Throwing out different ideas such as choosing kids who are less abled and less useful in their view, and the Prime Minister, being the slimy bastard that he is, just goes along with it, with no one else speaking up. He says, okay, we've chosen the 10%. All the people around this table are potentially just as terrifying as the alien sat upstairs. They even discuss cover stories so they don't look like they were just handing off the children, saying that they will be jabbed to stop them all speaking in unison, and when it goes wrong they'll just blame the aliens. Watching this post-COVID is quite surreal as well. The idea that the government would willingly commit such an act, how if they were given the choice to sacrifice something like this, it's really not far-fetched to believe they'd comply. And the fact this came out in 2009 but being so in tune with the last few years is a testament, but also terrifying. But Jack's decided that he's not going to make the same mistake again, so him and Yanto go to London to get face to face with the 456. As this is happening, Lois reveals to the government that all of their meetings have been recorded by Torchwood, and after day 3 having spent the time rebuilding Torchwood, it creates the very feeling of a climax, and we have hope rebuilt after it being demolished in the first episode. As Jack and Yanto make their way up to the 456, we realise that they seem quite unfazed, and it ends with them releasing a deadly virus in Thames House, putting the building into lockdown. No one can get in or out.
We're waiting for your reply.
Action has been taken.
Right, people, listen up. It's a fucking lockdown.
They brutally kill Clem as well as Yanto, who dies in Jack's arms. It is gut-wrenching, and all because of the great writing for their relationship through this series, as well as how we've met Yanto's family.
We're looking for Yanto Jones! You're not gonna find him in my bed, are you? I'm a married man!
But the entirety of Thames House is killed with this virus, as the beautiful vocals play over everyone slamming against the doors in an effort to escape. Jack and Yanto's final conversation is heartbreaking, paying off their previous conversations about the fact that Jack is immortal. This episode turned from what was looking to be a win into a tragedy, and killing off a main character.
Don't forget me. Never could. 1,000 years' time. You will remember. Yes, I will. I promise. I will.
As the camera rises as Jack and Yanto lay dead, the floor resembles a chessboard that 3 different sides have been playing on, and Torchwood just made a big move and lost. The following scene showing Jack and Yanto's body and how Yanto's body has gone cold whereas Jack is still there and still has blood flowing hits home how final this is. The final shot of all those bodies in this room is brilliant. What an episode, and what a place that this leaves us for the finale. And yeah, you thought that was the worst of it.
I'm recording this in case anyone ever finds it, so you can see. You can see how the world ended.
We see Jack, Gwen, Frobisher and Bridget sat around a table. Despite being on opposing sides, the lines have been pretty blurred in what's right, between particularly Jack and John. And that's showcased visually here, with them both sat face to face surrounded by corpses, despite both of their fear and best thoughts generally in mind. Throughout this whole series, we and the characters have been left in the dark about what the 456 actually do with the children. It's been the burning question that has been continuously avoided until now. Leaving it until the final episode to reveal this is genius. We kind of expect that the children are potentially needed by the alien to survive or something important like that.
You need these children. Are they keeping you alive?
No.
And what are they for?
The hit.
I don't understand.
The hit. They create chemicals. The chemicals are good.
Good in what way?
We feel good. The chemicals are good.
They're like drugs.
The fact that the 456 are willing to wipe out the planet just for getting high makes this so much more sinister. They're just space junkies, and it's horrific that they could just come down wanting to get a little fucking stone and could threaten to wipe out the entire planet. For that, dude needs to go to rehab ASAP.
You're shooting up on children. Our children.
We've lost. The government have started rounding up children. Jack and Lois are both in prison. There's nothing left to do. It's over. The first half of this episode is the end of the world, just falling into collapse. But it is really powerful seeing a final stand from everyone, even when there's seemingly nothing to be done. Gwen goes to inform Yanto's sister about his death, and what a brutal conversation that is. The way that Gwen attempts to console and empathize, but we're talking about Yanto's dad and how she knew him, but then Yanto's sister firing right back in how that she's just wrong, that their dad wasn't anything like what Yanto said, and Gwen realizing that she didn't really know Yanto, and it's an awkward scene, but it's brutal, and it's quite unnecessary. You could have easily had it just like Gwen successfully consoles Yanto's sister, but the lifestyle that they live, the characters that these people are, makes sense for it to go like this, and it's really upsetting. Frobisher is called into a meeting with the Prime Minister, who starts telling him that his kids are going to be taken, explaining that they need a scapegoat so that the public believe them basically, and that Frobisher is going to be that person and that his kids will be taken. Despite everything he's done, he has obliged with everything he's been asked. He's handled the situation the best as he could with also what he's been given. He's devoted his life to the government, to the civil service, and as much as he may not have made good decisions throughout this series, it's evident that he's not necessarily a totally awful person. And despite all of this, the Prime Minister has just informed him that his kids are going to be taken and handed over, just so that the public believe the cover story. Despite everything, he's just viewed as expendable and as usable.
But you've seen what they do to them! They're just girls, sir! They're just girls! They're not like...
I'm sorry, John.
And due to this, he lands on a horrific decision. A man who's been destroyed by the people that he's working for. He's had no sleep. He's been working tirelessly to confront the 456, and yes, again, not always making good decisions, but trying with what he has. But now he's just a man who's been destroyed by the people he's working for, and how are him and his wife supposed to live on after giving their own children away? The score is heartbreaking as John's hands shake violently, and we have this slow motion walk up the stairs just showcasing how difficult it is to be going through this horrendous decision. His wife's horrified look on her face whilst the kids are just having an innocent pillow fight. God, this is amazing, and it's brutal, and it's horrifying. After all of this, we cut back to Alice, who manages to get Jack brought in to help how to figure out how to stop the 456. It's a little predictable that they would be defeated using the audio wavelengths, but what wasn't predictable is the cost that comes with. Now I briefly want to take a second to talk about Decker, because I've mentioned him throughout the video and he's the expert on the 456, and his role in this show is a weird one to me, because it feels like they just cut it out. Like there's this one moment at the end of episode 2 where you think would have some payoff, but it doesn't. He's just kind of a dickhead scientist, and that's kind of all there is to him. And I find that quite frustrating watching back, where you know it doesn't really lead to much, because he's just a punching bag in this episode. But anyway, Jack realizes that he could copy the wavelength and transmit it back, and that would kill the 456. But the catch...
We've got no way of transmitting.
Of course you have.
Shut up.
Same way as them.
Is that he'd have to transmit it through a child, and that child is going to fry. And what child just happens to be nearby?
No, tell them no. One child or millions? Dad. No?
Jack's grandson, Stephen. But surely not. That's too much. This is Torchwood, the show with an alien sex cloud. This guy travelled with the Doctor, the man who opposes violence. Surely the Doctor will just show up. Surely Jack will find another outcome, a better solution. Surely it's not going to go that dark. Or maybe Jack's immortality could be inherited, right? Right?
We're running out of time.
Dad! No! No, Dad!
Captain.
Jack is unable to even look or talk back with Stephen. Jack murders his own grandson. His relationship with his already estranged daughter is now totally out the window. Sure, it worked. They defeated the 456. It's gone. But at what cost? The Prime Minister then following up saying that they were lucky after the past 5 days is insanity. And I'm glad that this slimy, hateable character gets his comeuppance. And I really like what they do with Bridget. Her speech to Lois while she's in prison talking about John. It's all great stuff. And as that played over Frobisher's final scene, made it even more impactful, because it makes us look back and realise everything that I've just said. 6 months later, the remaining members of Torchwood reunite with Gwen, returning the Vortex Manipulator, and Jack saying that he's leaving Earth. Which, after what you've just done and been through, I'm coming right with you, buddy. Jack has nothing left here, and also, how are you supposed to stay here after what you've just done and been through? With Gwen also going to be having a child shortly, and Torchwood dead, it's a perfect way to end the show. Although it didn't, but just ignore that for right now.
If you're the best England's got to offer, then God help you.
I'm Welsh.
Torchwood Children of Earth is a great season of Torchwood. It's one of the best seasons in the entire Whoniverse. Hell, it's just a great piece of television. The series took a drastically different approach, and it worked. The politics are the true genius of the series, and I think it has some expertly written characters with some great twists and turns. Some truly horrific scenes and an incredibly fascinating plot. I also want to take a second to mention the score, because I like the main Torchwood theme, but the score in seasons 1 and 2 were never particularly memorable, whereas a show like Doctor Who, so many memorable themes throughout its entire run. But the spin-offs never really had that, but I think this season, as much as it's nothing massive to write home about, I think there are some key pieces of music that are brilliant. Viewing this show now as well in a post-pandemic era of our own, it almost brings a new perspective. If you haven't seen Torchwood Children of Earth, I'd highly recommend giving it a watch through.
That's why I want you to stay away, because you're dangerous.
We are coming. We are coming. We are coming.
Did you feel it? Or did everything just go black? I felt it.
John Barrowman is a good man. Better than that. He's expendable.
Yeah, well, how about I go back into that house right now and get your wife?
Except you won't. Because you're a better man than me.
I've lived a long time. I have done a lot of things. I take it all back, but not him! No!
you know. I can just let you live when you were standing at Mum's.
If you put me on camera, I will tell people the truth.
Your daughters would know where they're going.
I can't do it, I won't. But you've seen what they do to them.
Yes, I can. Just watch me.